Teddy Host, thanks so much for coming back on to Talk Beliefs from your home in New York. You are a writer and artist who grew up in a family that was part of the Unification Church, also known as the Moonies. But today, you speak out against the church and cults in general. You've appeared on documentaries including A&E's Cults and Extreme Belief, and have appeared on this channel several times before. So how have you been doing, Teddy? We've had a whole pandemic since you last came on the show, and you've moved from San Francisco to New York. So what have you been up to since then?
Hey, yeah, good to see you again, Mark, and thanks for having me on. Yeah, I just kind of, I don't know. It's weird. I come back to New York like every 10 years. Obviously, I grew up here in Tarrytown for like the first, for my years before I was a teenager. So, and that's where the whole Moonie story comes from. Up about maybe 30, 40 minutes from the city, like north of New York City in Tarrytown, New York. And yeah, I don't know. I just, it was mostly, I think it was like mostly an industry move. I kept finding tech jobs in San Francisco, and I liked working in entertainment in New York. I just wanted to move to San Francisco because it was different. I was closer to my family in Seattle, but it just wasn't it. And I realized you kind of have to move to the city of your industry. I mean, now you can work kind of remotely these days, but just socially and everything, like I really like it. And the energy of New York, like I never came down from it. And my friends kept saying, like, it sounds like you still want to be in New York. So I just never let go.
Well, today we're going to be focusing on recent events where former President of Japan, Shinzo Abe, was shot and killed at the hands of a man who had a grudge against the Unification Church. But before we dissect this incident, let's just remind our audience of your background growing up in the church and what the Unification Church is all about.
I was born in Washington, D.C., actually. That's where my family lived at the time. But when I was maybe 2 or 3 years old, we moved to New York, Tarrytown, New York, where the Moon family actually lives. They're the family behind the Unification Church. They're mega rich. They own businesses and properties around the world through mostly human trafficking. The Unification Church, also known in pop culture as the Moonies because it's run by the Moon family. It was led by Sun Myung Moon, who believed himself to be the second coming of Jesus. As I looked into it further, he actually started in these fringe sex cults where you had to have sex with the leader in order to be in them. And that kind of still exists, that those beliefs exist within the Unification Church. There's a lot of beliefs around cleansing your blood through sex with the leader and stuff like that, or through basically this pure blood ideal of, if you join the Unification Church, then your children will be cleansed of original sin, which is the fall of man, Adam and Eve. That story in the Bible. It says we started from Adam and Eve, and they sinned, and then the whole of humanity has been sinful ever since. So Sun Myung Moon claimed that Jesus didn't quite finish his mission. He felt, or he believed, that Jesus needed to have a wife and kids and live his whole life, and he failed. He believes Jesus failed, and then he was the successor. So then he started his congregation in Korea, and it grew to be, he got involved with some very wealthy people in Korea, and it became a worldwide thing. And then he died in 2012. So that resulted in a few splinter groups happening from the original Unification Church. There's now the mainstream church, which is led by his wife, Houlihan, which is the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, FFWPU. And they have like hundreds of front groups. Well, the Unification Church originally had hundreds of front groups. And one of those groups is the Universal Peace Foundation or Federation, UPF. And they do a lot of events with big politicians and everything. But anyway, I can go into that later. And then there's another main splinter group called the Rod of Iron Ministries, otherwise known as Sanctuary Church. And this is the AR-15 gun cult with, Sean Moon, who is the son of Moon. He's the youngest son of Moon. And he has everyone use AR-15s, and he trains his congregation in weapons, and in like this apocalyptic paranoid way. And so, and he's in a big rivalry with his mother, Houlihan Moon, and has said in so many words that she should be dead, and things like that. So he runs that along with his brother Justin Moon, who owns Car Arms, KAHR, and they supply weapons to, I think, like countries around the world, like weapons of war. He's very pro-gun guy. He spreads a very paranoid message about, like, when governments get too much power, you got to be ready, which is the rhetoric we've been hearing all over. And it's no surprise that Sean Moon and Justin Moon were at the January 6th insurrection. So that's kind of what's happening now. And that's why I speak out. I kind of saw this really growing when Trump became president. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, let's go now to the events of July of this year in Japan. The country's former president, Shinzo Abe, was delivering a campaign speech in the streets of Nara when a lone assassin shot him in the heart. Abe died in hospital later that day, and it turns out that the killer wasn't motivated by politics at all, but rather a grudge against the Unification Church. Isn't that right?
Yes. So Tetsuya Yamagami, he's what's called a Jacob's child in the Unification Church. That's where you're not born into it, so you're not of the like pure blood, and there's like, that's its own story. It's a really horrible thing that like our elders like treated them like second-class citizens as a result. So anyway, that's its own story. But as I understood it, from what I gathered from multiple reports, was that he was his mom joined the Unification Church when they were when he was already like about to go to college. And so, he had known life without. He had, sustenance, financial, he had a financial cushion. He lived in society and his family was doing okay. And, then his mom joins the Unification Church, and, as it goes, it's a slippery slope of giving up all your money and assets to the group, because it's, I call it a cult for that reason. As his mom gave more and more money through spiritual sales, as that's the term that, Japan has been using a lot. They're like, we need to investigate these spiritual sales, meaning like liberate your ancestors by paying a fee and going to the Chungpyeong Healing Center in Korea, where you can liberate your ancestors, and this is like a ritual where you hit yourself, and anyway, basically, but you pay money for that, and it's a lot like Catholic indulgences, if you know anything about that. So it was through these like practices that Yamagami's mom just kept giving away more and more money, and he just saw his life kind of like deteriorating. He was in college. He got pulled out of college because couldn't afford it anymore. His brother, who had cancer, they couldn't pay for his medication or for his hospitalization as much. And so, that's probably why he decided to kill himself. And his father had also killed himself. So there was a lot of tragedy in this family. And, I think maybe as a result of the trauma, maybe the mother was, like, I need help. What do I do? Who can help me? And then she's just complying with, Unification Church, which is so very typical of cults to just, take advantage of the vulnerable. I've heard of countless people who joined the church, and I think I can name like 4 in my head who decided that they were going to kill themselves, and then they bumped into a church member and that saved their life. So they like gave their life to it, So yeah, like all of this was happening. And, Yamagami had made, or Tetsuya Yamagami, the son, he had made attempts to attack the church in the past. He, I read about how he brought like a Molotov cocktail to like a church center one time. And I don't think he was successful. Maybe it didn't work or something, or he didn't throw. I forgot how that ended, but yeah. And I had heard that he tried to assassinate Park Jae-moon at one point, and for whatever reason, it didn't work out. And so Shinzo Abe, who is the former prime minister of Japan, his grandfather actually, Nobusuke Kishi, he had embraced Sun Myung Moon, and they were both like involved with people from the Yakuza, which is like the Japanese mafia. There's this corrupt timeline that kind of ran through it. And Shinzo Abe was a descendant of that. And so there had been this like multiple generation relationship with the Unification Church, because the Unification Church helped the Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP in Japan, which is, the standard, that's the popular political group, even though it's very conservative. There's some very far right leaning people, that just goes to show that sometimes it's just a name and you have to just roll with it, even if you don't believe in it, if the words aren't literal. So, he was part of it. He had taken a lot of Unification Church money. He had, just had good ties with them. And, if you read reports now, there's so many politicians in Japan who are involved in the Unification Church that are being ratted out now, or being filtered out somewhat, because they're so in there that you can't completely remove everyone. So, again, it's 3 generations of leadership. So, I think Yamagami just saw someone who was like a known, someone where like if he killed a Unification Church member, it wouldn't be as big of a deal because no one would have known the Unification Church member, right? So that's kind of how I see it. Like he was like, well, this is going to make people see. And, when he did that, like a lot of second generation, like myself, when we heard he was like in the Unification Church, or it was because of the Unification Church, we were like, yeah, I get it. Like, because Japan is like, as what's her name? Sarah Hightower. She's also like a cult researcher. She called Japan like the ATM machine of the Unification Church. There's a lot of excerpts of Moon like online. If you go to like tparents.org, for example, which is a archive of Reverend Moon's speeches. He's talked a lot about how Japan, Imperial Japan had an occupation in the early 1900s in Korea. So basically when he was a child. So he uses that to guilt Japanese members, into paying more and to giving up more. And, there's videos I've seen online of like them really like just being like, are you going to give up your house? Are you going to give up all your, in Japanese, like, they really got taxed. There's a lot of suicide of second generation of people born in the Moonies there. There's a lot of, outcry now. I'm getting all types of tweets. Like I'm getting tagged in tweets in Japanese, and luckily there's like Google Translate and I can read them that way. I've been getting that since, because like this public figure who speaks out against, the Moon family. And so there's this historical resentment. So, I think people like Yamagami, it could happen again. I don't know. It's a serious thing. And I'm glad that the doors are open there. Like now people are investigating this, and I hope it stays on the table until something changes.
Teddy, you've been doing a lot of research into this shooting, and it seems that this wasn't an isolated incident. Yamagami had already tried to assassinate the church's acting leader, Houlihan, but there was an incident that happened just a week before Abe's killing that may be significant. Isn't that right?
Yeah, definitely. There was it was strange. It kind of it went through my like ex-Mooney circle, or just anyone who's even still in the Unification Church. There was a video of Sean Moon, from the Rod of Iron Ministries, the leader of that group, in his bullet crown. He somehow went into like a church center where there were a lot of church members gathered. Like, I don't know how many were from his mother's group and from his own, but he went up there saying like, I'm the king, like I'm the one that you're supposed to follow. Because supposedly Moon gave him, the birthright, or passed the torch to him. But Houlihan Moon has said like, no, I'm the ex-wife. Come on, like I'm the true parent, and she calls herself the only begotten daughter. I don't know the exact story, and I don't want to make it sound like it belongs to anyone. It's all just a corrupt mafia empire. So I'm not for anyone, but I'm just thinking like, what if Sean Moon sees this and he's like, ha, even Teddy believes that I'm the king, because he totally would do that. Anyway, but he went in there and he was on stage. My friend Ren Robot, she's also an activist. She put this on her TikTok. She translated the Korean because she was in Korea for a while. She's American, but anyway. And he's saying like, what are you all stupid? Like, I'm the king, like follow the father, and, kind of saying like misogynist things too. And it led to some of the members, like the Japanese members, they're getting up and saying, and I believe this was in Nara, the actual place where Shinzo Abe was shot. There was a church center there. There isn't a church member for like miles and miles. So, this one member of his mom's group was like, hey, don't say those things about mother. They call him true mother. And, then it just started a mob, like a bunch of people started to react and yell, and they just all got pushed out the door. There's video footage of this. It was kind of scary. Like we all didn't know what was going on. Those of us who were watching were like, oh my God, is Sean Moon going to take over the whole church? This like gun cult guy, like, is he going to make is he going to arm everyone? I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's just I think some people don't take him seriously because he's pretty wacky. Like, I don't know. I don't think he has the couth to like really be attractive to like a diverse group of people, like in lifestyles. He seems to take the most extreme. Like after the assassination happened, there was a video, people did a lot of research obviously. And there was a video of Sean Moon I think it was a different video it was the same video. It was a long video. And he was just kind of doing some kind of ritualistic thing where he was walking through the crowd and blessing people, something like that. And there was one person, he was wearing a mask because of, the pandemic, and his hair looked a lot like Yamagami's. Now, I don't know, like I haven't heard much more about it. And I did interview with someone from like a major national Japanese newspaper a week ago, and he said that wasn't Yamagami. Like they confirmed that wasn't Yamagami. So I tend to believe that because this was like, this newspaper, it wasn't like a conservative, it wasn't a politically agreeing newspaper to like Sean Moon. It was more liberal. So, I think they would look more critically at this, and they said it wasn't him. But still, I wonder, I don't know. But yeah, whether he was in Sean Moon's congregation or not is up to question. There's also this other factor that of Sean Moon early on in his splinter group's history, which started maybe like when was it? I think it started like right after Moon died, or soon after, like in the mid 2010s. I don't know the exact year, but he would, I think just as a way to bring more people to him and to demonize his mom's mainstream Unification Church, he said like, we're going to give the Japanese members back their money, like as a way to like say, hey, this is the justice group, so I think he got a lot of Japanese members riled up as a way to, but evidently he still labor traffics his people. He still makes them do free stuff for him. And I mean, it was a point that he didn't want people in vans selling door to door. I don't know if they do that or not, but there are still other ways, where he cuts corners to like make sure he gets the most and everyone else gets just enough to like stay interested and survive. But yeah, that's another element that I hope they look into.
Teddy, do you think lone wolves like Yamagami are a continuing problem? And do you think this will happen again?
Yeah, I think that's the main problem. When I was in a documentary on A&E talking about Rod of Iron Ministries, at the time they were just called Sanctuary Church. There was this like fear of like, oh no, they're going to plan some kind of big government attack or something. But the whole time, to me, my biggest fear was that there were going to be lone wolves, because I don't think they're going to risk their worldwide empire and their business and their relationships by having some kind of attack. Their empire is way too big. There's way too many tentacles around the world with their businesses and political ties. So yeah, I did worry about, all these men who, these young boys, especially, who are growing up in this like, insecure masculinity group where they have to like show how tough they are. And I call the Unification Church sometimes the church of bad dads, because people like my dad were absent. They were required to be, but I think some of the more, dads who came from maybe a more stable background were more present in their kids' lives, but many aren't. There's a lot of mentally ill, like undiagnosed mentally ill people in the Unification Church. It's where they found comfort. So yeah, I worry about that. That's just a cocktail for like something like this to happen. And something like this did happen on American soil last year in Dobbs, Ferry, New York, just north of the city near Tarrytown. There was one Rod of Iron Ministries member who lived there. He lived in Austin, actually, which is north, but the incident happened in Dobbs Ferry. His name is Nicholas Skolstad, and he kind of snapped. He rammed into a Metro Transit Authority vehicle, so like this public transit vehicle, and I don't know if he had any weapons, but he was like screaming like, I am Jesus, or something like that, and something about vengeance. And what they found a kill list with like politicians and certain figures, who don't politically agree with like the far right. And he might still be in jail. I don't know where he's at now, but I remember looking at his Twitter feed, and he just seemed really, just very far gone, very extreme. And Sean Moon just like, butters these people up. He just totally like ruffles them up. He ruffled, so when he went to Japan and spoke to that congregation there, we were all kind of worried. We're like, yeah, this guy is, I don't know. I knew him as a kid in Tarrytown. I saw him around town, and he was always a bully to the kids. He was a total jerk, and he always got to get away with it because parents couldn't touch him because he was spiritual royalty. So when you have some guy with like guns who has never been told no by people, who have bowed to him since he was a baby, like that's just, you're just asking for like a really, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. And obviously, it's showing now. And again, that's kind of why I'm speaking out. It's easy to dismiss someone like Sean Moon, who wears a crown of bullets. It's like, look at that crazy guy. Yeah, whatever. I'm normal, and that person has nothing to do with me, and I don't care. But it's like, he's got a lot of money, and he's making a lot of connections with far right people. Like, he's had Steve Bannon at his event, Joey Gibson at his event. He's had other far right figures, and he loves Trump. There's a picture of him with Don Jr., Donald Trump's son, and they're buddies through guns because, Justin Moon is a gun manufacturer. So, it's, and actually, another thing I heard recently is that he's talking to like his group is talking to local schools, like they're talking to local schools and like getting them to like buy their paranoid narrative, and that freaks me out. And I don't know what to do. I did what I could with that documentary, trying to get the media to like pay attention. It's like, okay, cool, you know about this, cool, all right, I'm gonna live my life now. But I don't know.
Are they saying they're the Unification Church, or under some guise of something else when they go to the schools?
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know much about it, and I looked it up. I Googled it. There's no reports about it because I think they just, I think this is happening in Pennsylvania, where it's like gun country. It's a swing state, so I think they just go to those already kind of more red, like more conservative schools, and they just like pull them further. I don't know too much of the details. This is just what I've heard from another ex-Moonie, and yeah, it doesn't make me feel good.
When you mention the Moonies to people, they think of the mass weddings or maybe even the gun-toting members of the church's splinter group, the Sanctuary Church. But upon diving deep into the world of Sun Myung Moon, we can see a lot more going on behind the scenes. And this has very little to do with peace and love, wouldn't you say?
I mean, any dictatorship in the world, any kind of quote-unquote terrorist group, probably talks about glory and peace and happiness and whatever, like ISIS, the Taliban, they probably all talk about heaven and love. The way they enforce that is what anyone should be paying attention to. It doesn't matter about your ideals, it's like, well, how well do you play with others? That's kind of what I judge a group by. So, that's kind of how I see Moon. He's extreme. He called, anyone who's like LGBTQ, like dung-eating dogs. He thinks they shouldn't exist. He's flip-flopped a lot about talking about race. Like he's talked about how like, like who would marry a black person or like a fat person? But then later in his life, I think to save his PR, he's like, black people are beautiful. I'm like, whatever, dude, we know how you really feel. So like, anyway, he's this extreme figure, and he's one of his right-hand man from the start, Bo Hee Pak, was actually in the Korean CIA. And so this, I think he was probably getting some like government backing, or I don't know about government, but like maybe like, interest group funding for that. Bo Hee Pak was really he was the more charismatic. He had the more powerful voice, whereas I think Moon was a little more of the wacky, like spiritual guy, So, but Bo Hee Pak would translate more of his speeches. So you hear mostly him speaking like, we will bring the fatherland to the world, in his like better English and everything. So anyways, all this is to say like, I don't know. I see the Unification Church as a political group because they do a lot of political like events. The Family Federation for World Peace, like Hak Jahan's group, she has done events in the past few years with huge politicians, and it's out in the open. Like they recently did a 10-year anniversary of Reverend Moon's death, where Mike Pompeo was like the main speaker. He's the former Secretary of State. Like he was the main speaker at this 10th anniversary of Reverend Moon's death. So he was talking about the struggles of Sun Myung Moon and everything like that, And I think we all know in the church, like that he doesn't really care about the Moons. Like he's just getting paid a lot of money. Like I think a lot of these politicians just get paid to speak, and this includes like Mike Pence has spoken at events. Trump at the 20th anniversary of 9/11 spoke at a Family Federation event, or UPF, which is another front group of the FFWPU. So, that just shows like they've been doing this for so long. They take their human trafficking money that the members make and they give it to politicians, and they have political influence, and, they're trying to make this like very kind of far right world. And they've done that in other countries. I know of one story where they were involved with certain political activity and conflict in Bolivia in the 80s. There was, this involved someone named Klaus Barbie, who was a Hitler-era Nazi. Like, there's reports about this online.
Oh, yes, he was brought to trial in his old age.
Yeah. So there was some kind of like, it had to do with like cocaine, and there was like cocaine coups, and there's a lot of activity. There was a lot of setting up shop in South America, the Unification Church, and like in like Honduras, Brazil, and other places around there. And what I've read here and there is that a lot of it has to do with like the drug trade down there. They're getting that drug money, and it's just like wherever they can get it. And then Moon will put some kind of peaceful narrative over it, and then members will be all about it, and they'll make more money for the church.
And Moon was perfectly aware he was doing this, wasn't it?
Yeah, Moon was totally aware he was doing this. I just don't think he cared anymore. He was so wildly rich and taking advantage of people. I've gotten to the point, it's been so long. Like, I used to think that Moon like really actually was trying to do a good thing. Maybe he was at some point, but I've come to the point where I'm like, no, he's a total con man. Like, he probably laughs about the things that he makes, the ways that he makes members humiliate themselves. Like, come on, like hitting yourself to rid yourself of evil spirits, and you have to pay for that. He probably laughs at them. I'm pretty sure. Like, that's just how people have been, because they get indoctrinated by him in a way that he learned from like a North Korean prison camp. Once he learned that, how to like, exhaust people and coercively persuade them at isolated centers, based on his experience in a North Korean prison camp, I was like, you can build an empire from there with a bunch of slaves.
Well, so many cult leaders have that either narcissistic and or sociopathic sort of attitude, don't they?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I think he's just like, I'm doing a good thing. And he's helped fund death squads around the world. I'm sorry, I don't know too much of like the really finite details or the really specific details, but I can tell you that there's a podcast called Behind the Bastards, and they have a 2-part episode called The Moonies Are So Much Worse Than You Could Possibly Imagine. It came out maybe 6 months ago or so, maybe a little bit more. And it just goes through so much, and wow. Just the timeline from start to finish, and all the way up to, and Moon doing crazy things like this. This comes up a lot too. There was like a crowning ceremony. He had it at the Dirksen building. There were a few politicians he paid to kneel to him and give him a scepter while he was in like, he had a crown and a robe, like a cartoon. And like, this is, you can find this online. Just look up like.
Yeah. I think we could do another interview just about these layers of infamy, that you're alluding to.
Yeah, but this is all just to give you an idea of like, this person is, there's no balance. There's no like, oh, am I really doing something wrong? It's like, no, he's absolutely about himself and everything, his affairs that he had, he spiritually justified those. He said these were providential affairs. Anything gets spun, and some people fall off, but a majority stay on because they're just too involved, because he got it from the start. He took all their money and assets, and like they based their life around him. So, yeah.
Well, it certainly is a worrying state of affairs. I just want to thank you, Teddy, for your continuing activism in spreading awareness about this group and others like it. And speaking of your activism, you've been doing a lot on TikTok lately, I see.
Yeah, actually, TikTok's a great platform. I'm actually a video editor, motion graphics guy. I do like multimedia design, just Adobe everything. That's me. So I'm like, perfect, and TikTok, it just feels fresh and new, and I get a lot of activity there. Like it's pretty cool. Like it's been around like not as long as like YouTube and some other sources, so it's not as cluttered. So not to say that I know Talk Beliefs is on YouTube, and actually when I Google my name, like your videos come up first, so I really appreciate that. But you have built such like a huge base there, So, and so with so many videos, but with TikTok, yeah, it's kind of more casual than like a podcast. It's a little more quick, like, and I don't know, you just flip through and it's like roulette. You don't know what's going to come up. So someone who maybe didn't know something about this cult before, or like how it's involved with certain businesses or politicians, will like learn something new. And I do get those comments, and especially after the assassination of Shinzo Abe, like a lot of people are listening now. Like when I explain things, like I saw more comments were like, whoa, I didn't know that. Whoa, because it's like connected to like a major news story. So yeah, I like the kind of, it's spontaneous, but it's also like, yeah.
Do you get any pushback from people who are still in the Moonies who happened across these TikToks?
No, I think most of the people in the Unification Church who react are usually like my parents' age, or like kind of the elders, because I think people who get indoctrinated into it, like they believe they chose it, even though they were coercively persuaded through psychological manipulation. But I don't think they'll ever admit that unless they do a lot of processing. But yeah. Because for that reason, I think they're more like, hey, this is the thing I chose, and like you don't know what it's like. And I can understand that they're like, you don't know what it's like because you grew up in it. Like I never chose it, but so because I never chose it, it's easier for me to speak critically about it. But at the same time, it's like it's not really mine, and so I do have to be mindful of like others' stories. But at the same time, I will say in response to those people that you probably joined when you were like a young adult in college or something, right? So before you even like got to live life as any other type of adult in any other context in the real world, like you were only in the Unification Church, and you only lived through that portal, and you depended on it for your resources, community, your job. So really, how much do you know what you're talking about when you talk about the world outside of that, versus someone who I grew up in it and then I entered that world that most of you guys had to give up. So it's just something to keep in mind. Yeah.
I will leave links to your social media as well as creative platforms in the description below. And all that's left to say is thank you once again, Teddy, for coming back on To Talk Beliefs. Thanks.
I really appreciate what you're doing. And yeah, I hope it makes an impact, and anticipating the comments, but hey, it's good. Let's have these talks. So it's the name of the show.